Greetings and welcome to TMH English News with me, Delithna Dawalko. Our headlines for today include Abiy Ahmed's trying to mobilize 1 million people from the Ethiopian diaspora for his ongoing war. 17 children have died of malnutrition at Wu'ro Hospital. Ethiopian government using mass arrests of Tigrayans to extort wealth and violate human rights. Abiy, and what they have called his diaspora army, is trying to mobilize 1 million people from the Ethiopian diaspora by January 7th, 2022 to beef up his war campaign. Writing on his official Twitter account, Abiy Ahmed called on all Ethiopians and friends of Ethiopia around the world to join what he dubbed as the Great Ethiopian Homecoming Challenge. This is the latest effort in mobilizing civilians for his genocidal campaign against the Tigray region. The Ethiopian Prime Minister has refused repeated calls for a negotiation as well as a ceasefire. In related news, Ethiopian government has closed secondary schools to support this ongoing national call. According to a state-affiliated Fana broadcasting corporate, the Ethiopian Ministry of Education on Thursday announced that all secondary schools throughout the country will be closed for 1 week to help in harvesting the plantations of those who are on the front line in the fight against the armed oppositions. The latest move came amid intensified fighting between the government and its regional coalition, and on the other hand, the Tigrayan forces and their allies on that front. In Wu'ro Hospital, 17 children have died of malnutrition. The hospital also said people with underlying illnesses are suffering due to lack of medicines. These patients have run out of essential drugs that they have been taking all their life, a situation that has left them on the cusp of death. The increasing deaths of malnourished children and people with underlying illnesses and famine is attributed to all-around siege of the people of Tigray by Abiy Ahmed's government. The call for access World Food Program calls for unhindered humanitarian access to nearly 8 million people behind battle lines in the northern part of Ethiopia. The World Food Program's Claire Neverland in Addis Ababa told CBS that they have been struggling to get food to those who are most in need. Here's what she has to say.
We really need all authorities to allow us the access to reach the vulnerable populations wherever and whenever needed.
Tigray hasn't had any supplies for nearly 4 months now. Trucks have now started moving into Tigray, but with only a minuscule percent of the millions of people suffering due to this food shortage.
We must get the food and nutrition assistance to people immediately to avert any further catastrophic levels of hunger.
As these children suffer starvation, Abiy Ahmed, who has swapped his business suit for a battle of fatigues, has bent on intensifying the war even more.
It's difficult to gauge the real extent of the food crisis. For the most part, international media has not been allowed into the conflict zones, and in some areas, communication has been cut off altogether.
These devastations have escalated to what the UN has called for the world's worst hunger crisis in over a decade. Starvation has become a weapon of war, with hundreds of thousands of children in dire need of food and on the cusp of death. CBS showed images of emaciated bodies, famished children filmed in October, and aid workers say it's even worse now. Tigray and their auction promoting belongings to Tigrayans in the western Tigray is being auctioned off by expansionist Amhara forces. Information coming out of the Ba'akar town and Kafta Humera district of the western Tigray indicate the expansionist Amhara forces have evicted all Tigrayans from their town. Following the eviction, they have started expropriating property belonging to the Tigrayans and selling them off to the Amharas, who came from Gondar and at a very low price. Atalay Tafara, who's been appointed as an administrator of the area by the expansionist Amhara forces, is coordinating this auction. Tafara has been playing a key role in the forcing of Tigrayans out of Ba'akar town. As the extortions continue, the Ethiopian government is using the mass arrests of Tigrayans to extort wealth as well as violate their human rights. Some witnesses in Addis Ababa has told Tigray TV that by phone that instances of Tigrayans are being picked from the detention centers and executed in the increasing from time to time. Here's what he had to say.
እስር ቤት ማለት ዳርጋ ሓያል ወንጀል ዝገበርካ እዩ ትግራይ ስለዝኾንካ ጥራሕ እዮም ዝርእዮና
Being Tigrayan is like top crime. They give us one bread a day and they just throw it at you as if they were feeding dogs. They beat you, they drag you on the ground naked, they demand that the inmates pay money and execute them if they don't pay. Even after one is released, they send another person to rearrest him. Addis Ababa has become hell for Tigrayans. 1,000 Tigrayans are entered and another 1,000 are moved to a different location. They're constantly moved from one detention center to another as the places are full of Tigrayan detainees. For instance, I was taken along with a lot other to locations around Yakabado, which is out of reach to any visitors, including family members. There you are, a non-entity, doomed to disappear, especially if you don't pay the amount of money asked by the officers there. They're using the mass arrest of Tigrayans to expropriate wealth, property, and belongings of these Tigrayans, adding those who cannot afford to pay are being exposed to extreme abuses or even execution. I, for one, have been released recently. I had to pay 300,000 birr. I wonder what is happening to those who don't have money. I had no bank book. They escorted me up to the bank and asked the bankers to give me my bank book, telling them I was a prisoner. After taking the money, they told me to just disappear. This is how I got off the hook. One witness said that they were arrested and detained with her deceased father's body included. I am a Tigrayan resident of Addis. Although I am not well versed in Tigrinya language, my father was in a lot of distress due to the war in Tigray region. He particularly got sick when he saw the Mahabar Dago massacre. We took him to the hospital, but didn't make it. He passed away. While we were returning from the hospital with his body, we were stopped on the road. They searched everybody in the vehicle. They selected those of us Tigrayans, even opened the coffin, and locked us up in prison together with the body. These witnesses also added that Tigrayans specifically have been excluded from schools and exams due to their identity and their identity alone. I am a 12th grade student. I always thought I was an Ethiopian, but we were removed from the exam in school because of our identity. They called our names, about 20 Tigrayan students identified because of our last names, and immediately expelled us from the school. 4 U.S.-based Ethiopian American civic organizations led by the expansionist Amhara diaspora filed a complaint on individuals they claimed conspired to overthrow the government of Ethiopia. On the 21st of November 2021, the Peace and Development Center International convened a Zoom meeting where individuals of Ethiopian origin, American and European diplomats who served in Ethiopia discussed Ethiopia's current trajectory and the way forward. Representatives of the government in Tigray in the U.S., Berhana Ghebrekristos, was the key speaker in that discussion. The 4 organizations claimed that the discussion was a ploy to unseat the current government in Addis Ababa. The organizations filed a complaint with the Department of Justice, the New York Attorney's Office, as well as the Federal Bureau of Investigations. The organization that led complaints are Global Ethiopian American Advocacy Nexus, Worldwide Ethiopian Action Fund, Ethiopian American Development Council, as well as Unity for Human Rights and Democracy. Observers say the act of lodging a complaint by the civic organizations against such a peaceful dialogue on the current situation and the future prospects of the country indicated how the expansionist Amhara diaspora are extremely intolerant to the democratic discourse. PDCI is a group of a concerned international senior professionals of Ethiopian origin, and committed to peace and development in Ethiopia and is incorporated in the United States system. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is said to be exasperating the threat of a region-wide turmoil by unleashing a weaponized radical group of plain local warlordism. Former EU Special Representative to the Horn of Africa, Alexander Rondos, said Ethiopia's 12-month conflict has sown the seeds of a regional destabilization, which will accelerate if the political settlement is not sought out immediately. This story was based on the veteran EU diplomats wrote under the title, Ethiopia is tearing itself apart. In an article he wrote under the title, Alexander Rondos warns that the effects of the failure will be felt in the neighboring areas, in the fragile relations among the countries of the region, as well as the strategic environment surrounding the Horn of Africa as a whole. He also showed that the destabilized region could lead into economic collapse, displacement, and that those who affect would reverberate as near as Kenya and Somalia, but also as far as Europe. According to Rondos, Ethiopia's current conflict is a centrifugal political force who were contained over the past 30 years by a significant budget subsidized to the regions nearest to the frontier. This is no longer the case. The cost of the war has diminished the subsidies, and these already impoverished border populations who will seek more opportunity across the frontier. Once the provider of stability in the region, Ethiopia has become an exporter of insecurity. Ethiopia is now overarmed and underfinanced. Weapons are making their way across frontiers, and one should be alarmed that the jihadist group of Al-Shabaab, for example, can buy guns more cheaply from the Ethiopian market than they can from the Yemen. Ethiopia's deteriorating internal security is to be exploited by the Al-Shabaab and other like-minded groups to infiltrate the recruitment of Ethiopia. If these persists and succeeds, an entirely new front is open, making Kenya's security even more fragile, as Rando continues. He said that the threat has been exacerbated by Abiy Ahmed himself, the Ethiopian Prime Minister, calling for a leave in mass under whichever locality has been encouraged to arm itself, unleashing weaponized radical groups, or plain local warlordism. This dispute over the centralization of political authority in Ethiopia, which spilled over into the war with Tigray, was accompanied by a deliberate and parallel strategy to realign influence in the Horn of Africa. The former EU Special Representative of the Horn of Africa said, and according to Rondos, it is now emerging that the agreement between Isaias Afwerki and the president of Eritrea and Abiy Ahmed, the prime minister of Ethiopia, supplemented by the inclusion of Somalia into a trilateral agreement, was to create a bloc of countries which highly centralize an authoritarian political power system to control the eastern coastline of Africa from Eritrea to Somalia. In the process, efforts to consolidate cooperative security and development in the region under the umbrella of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development were jettisoned, leaving it with new divisions and no institutions to manage differences. The EU veteran diplomat said if this grim outlook is not reversed, the threat of disorder emanating from Ethiopia will not only engulf the region but threaten the security of the Red Sea as whole. Abiy's war on Tigray has turned into the potential dissolution of Ethiopia. Nothing is permanent, not least in a region which has recognized two secessions and lives within another in Somaliland. Rondo said the current successor of the Ethiopian Empire may collapse, adding Eritrea's lethally eccentric regime cannot last forever. He, however, projected a scenario in which Ethiopia's vast population, whether living in a united country or a separate entity, will inevitably seek access to the sea. Thus, a new transition beckons from Ethiopia, but this time it must encompass the whole region, which will have been so damaged by the events of the past few years, as Rondos advised. The Tigrayan refugees in Sudan have commissioned and announced that over 8,800 Ethiopian refugees from Tigray had registered fingerprints in the reception centers of Hamdiat and Medina on the 8th by Tuesday. According to the commission, the total number of Ethiopians from Tigray relocated to the permanent campus in Rakuba and El Tunadiba rose to 42,880. Over the past days, operations began to support more than 600 of the nearly 2,400 Ethiopian refugees who recently arrived from the war-torn Tigray region to the Basunda border area in the El Gadaraf to the new Babakari camp in the state. The authorities reported that more than 1,400 other refugees now present in other border areas will also be relocated to the Babakari camp in the next few days. As we move on to the European Union, they announced on Thursday that it was stepping up security for essential staff remaining its missions on the war-torn Ethiopia. The bloc has ordered non-essential staff to leave the capital of Addis Ababa, where it has diplomatic missions to both Ethiopia as well as the African Union. In coordination and in accordance with the instructions given by our member states, we have asked our non-essential personnel and dependents to leave the country immediately, said by spokeswoman Nabila Masrali. We also increased security measures for the EU and the local staff, she added. Several European countries have urged their citizens to leave the capital, and if they can, and the EU spokeswoman urged travelers to heed their government's advice as soon as possible. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir and Abdel Fattah al-Burhan of Sudan have discussed border clashes between the Sudanese and Ethiopian armed forces. Kiir told members of his government and foreign diplomats at the closing of the Governors Forum the recent military confrontation between the Sudanese armed forces and the Ethiopian troops and their allied militias was worrying, and it caused a security threat to the region. The South Sudanese leader revealed he spoke to Chairman of Sudan's Sovereign Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan of Sudan, to stop further escalations. I tried to talk to the general to stop what they have been thinking of. I didn't talk to Prime Minister Abiy, but I will still try to talk to him as well. He added on Wednesday morning the Ethiopian forces said Amhara militiamen launched an attack with heavy artillery inside Sudanese territory. There were no casualties among the soldiers or the civilians as the result of this attack. Salva Kiir also expressed concern that ongoing fighting between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray armed forces could cause security threats to the entire Horn of Africa and their region. These are people known to all of us. We have been with them for a very long time, he said. Salva Kiir stated that the people in Tigray have been subjected to extreme humanitarian disasters because the government has been refusing to allow relief to go unaffected to these people, and humanitarian aid has also been blocked. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend.